Okay, we are back, and we're starting a little late, but we'll see what happens. I have the doggy trap with me. Hey, buddy. Okay, yeah, he's having a good time, and I'm trying to be a little bit brighter on the light, but I gotta be honest, it's a little much. So I don't know. Maybe we'll figure this out, but it might be the only one that we have this much light. I don't. Yeah, I don't know how people have it so bright. Maybe I'm just super nocturnal. Anyway, some interesting stuff happened today or yesterday, and it actually was spawned by a conversation I was having with Dr. Tim Matson, which, by the way, we have a team photo. By the way, I have the team's permission, and this isn't the entire team, but I have the team's permission to share this, and thought I'd show all of you a little bit about Merle. So here, this is a meeting we had, I think, on Friday, and we have some of the core team here. We'll go over them in a second, but a lot of today's episode stemmed from a conversation I was having with Matson this weekend, and a discussion I was having with Taylor about this afterwards, which, after some back and forth with Taylor, it made me realize, maybe we should. He's moving around. Maybe we should dig in a little bit deeper on this. And what that deeper topic is thinking like a PhD. And I want to qualify this and say that I, my hope is that we can get everybody to put their weapons down and understand that this isn't like an attack or an elitist thing. So if you immediately are sort of like a call to arms because how dare Goju try to teach me how to think as if thinking like a PhD is this special elitist group and only PhDs can think this way, I want to say this is not what I'm trying to say at all. And I know that there are some people in the world that really lean into this PhD doctor thing. I think maybe, like it's complicated. On the one hand, I can understand people leaning into it because it can be a fairly arduous process, and I know a lot of people almost broke, or many people that did break, trying to do a PhD. And so the people that have survived it, and that's sort of an intentional word choice, as I do think it's like survival for most of us mere mortals. I think that it's something people want to maybe be excited about. And so if people want to have PhD after their name, or they want to call themselves doctor, I get it. I understand. However, what you may notice is that myself and Matson, very rarely will we ever, so here's my website, and, there's no PhD here, no PhD here, and part of the reason why I do this, and I think Matson does this, or at least I think why both of us maybe don't add those things, is I think that we are sort of sensitive to the fact that there might be a stigma of people thinking, oh, these ivory tower sort of elite PhDs coming in thinking that they're the best in the world, and all the rest of us mere mortals, we don't matter. And I definitely have seen some of that, where I think some people do come in a little bit too hot and heavy with this. But again, I want to also point out that I know many people that really struggled to get through their program, and each PhD process is very much individualized. It's different than, at least for me, almost all the schooling that I had prior to this, which is sort of coursework, with the exception of maybe my master's thesis and other sort of minor research. But a lot of it is coursework and trying to do well in classes, demonstrating competency in the core material that the university thinks is important. And that in and of itself can be very hard, but the PhD process, at least for me, and I want to say for someone like Madsen and many of the other folks that I either mentor or other PhDs or professors that I know, it is in many cases a really intense process. And part of the reason why that process is so intense is you will often have to learn how to fail in a way that you may have never experienced failing prior to the PhD. That I think many of us fail in life, but we don't have to sort of maybe belabor those failures. We can fail in a game of chess or in a card game or what have you. And we don't have to sort of belabor that and ask, like, why did I fail? And do this deep sort of thorough examination and receive feedback on all the reasons why you didn't win. And so you have the opportunity, I think, to maybe not learn from those failures. But in PhD school, oftentimes what people have to do is you have to face those failures head on. At least that was my experience and many of the folks that I know, because the failures that you usually will experience are things like trying to get your research published and working with people that are more experts in general research and also the field that you're maybe trying to break into than you are, which puts you potentially at a serious disadvantage. And I think most advisors go in sort of knowing this, and then it's a question of whether the student has the grit and the mental fortitude to be able to take critical feedback and grow from that, to listen to this critical feedback on something that already has been rejected or not accepted. You essentially kind of know you failed. And now you have to deeply assess those failures in order to try to improve it so you can go to the next step. You can actually get this accepted. And the reason why I think that this is, in many cases, fundamentally disjoint from many of the other degrees that one goes through prior to the PhD is most of those degrees I have found, and through my own investigation or looking at this sort of statistical analysis or my own sample set of colleagues, almost all of those other degrees, including potentially professional doctorates, are about success. And what I mean by that is when you take a class, let's say you pick maybe one of the hardest classes I took in grad school, which was numerical analysis. This class just rocked me. I mean, I think I actually failed to the final exam, and it was just so hard because it was like calculus, so differentiation, integration, multivariate uh, analysis for both integration and differentiation, as well as numerical error with floating points. And all of this in the space of mastery of like programming. So the like the fusion of the different domains to really grok this is, I think this was one of the first classes where you sort of had to be really strong in math, programming, hardware, like systems, and theory, all rolled up into one. And so this is probably one of the hardest graduate classes that I took. And I'm pretty sure I failed the final exam. I still got an A- in this course. And part of the reason why I got an A- is going into the final, I had like, I don't know, a very high A. And also it was, I think, weighted, because I think most of us went into the final and many of us, I think, failed it. But it was weighted, and so you could still do very poorly and come out sort of unscathed. What's different, though, about doing research, especially for tier 1 peer-reviewed publications, is when you fail that final, you fail the final. There's no sort of protecting your ego or giving you a soft pitch where you can walk away and say, yeah, I failed that, but I still got an A-. So like, I'm killing it. It's literally, you're going from, and keep in mind too, most of the people that I know that do PhDs are top of class, right? It's sort of, it is in some ways a self-selecting bias by the time you get to PhD programs, because you sort of can't even apply to many of the programs unless you have the incredible GPA, 3.8 minimum, and you scored incredible on GRE and all these other things. And so already you know that the people that oftentimes are even that just applying are just like Einstein level geniuses. So they've done, I think in many cases, almost nothing but success academically up until that point. Yet, with almost all of the folks that I know, myself included, where I think my graduating GPA from my master's was, I don't know, it was like 3.9 something. It wasn't 4.0 because I think I got 2 A-, but the rest were A's. And this wasn't like a weighted thing. It wasn't out of 5 or something. Like 4.0 was the best you could do. And so here I am, coming into the PhD program, and my record is like unblemished for the most part, minus those 2 A-. But my GRE scores and all that were pretty solid. And then I start submitting research papers, and it's rejection after rejection after rejection, which again, for the people that are doing PhDs, this can be a very foreign concept, because up until this point, almost all the things that they've done, they've not just been able to accomplish, they've been able to accomplish with mastery. At least that's what the world is telling them. You're doing incredible. But the problem is that with many of those things, you're sort of maybe in this, and again, this is probably going to sound more harsh than I mean for it to sound, because I really don't mean for this to sound harsh, but I'm going to kind of share how I sort of really feel about this, is you're sort of, you're sort of maybe a big fish in a small pond at this point. And I say that with all due respect to any of the best universities in the world. I think it's still very much like a big fish in a small pond. And the reason for that is once you make the switch to the PhD, you suddenly now are competing with arguably the best people, especially if you shoot for tier one research conferences or journals. You're now competing on the world stage with arguably the most sophisticated and advanced scientists, engineers, researchers that are alive. And so even though at whatever school, maybe you're at Oxford, maybe you're at MIT, Princeton, Harvard, you name it, you're still, prior to the PhD, you're still in this cohort of students that's like, yeah, maybe it's the best university in the world, but your competing cohort are just kind of like the students that are there. Whereas when you switch to the PhD, you now are competing globally with arguably the best people on the planet. And that can be a very jarring experience. At least it was for me. And so as we were talking this weekend, Mattson and I were getting into not a heated debate, but we were getting into some complicated topics. And I was kind of walking through some of the nuance of this with Taylor. And Taylor was pointing out that what he was maybe the most impressed by was how Mattson and I were giving each other sort of honest feedback about things. But both of us were receiving that feedback and saying, actually, that's a pretty fair point. And so, thank you. I'll work on correcting this, or something of that nature. And part of the reason why this conversation started is Mattson pointed out that there was a mistake that I made, and he was right that I did make this mistake. And upon seeing it, I quickly acknowledged to him, yes, that's right. We should fix this mistake. Thank you for pointing this out. And then he and I went down a couple rabbit holes on like, well, what about this thing and that thing? And I'll spare you the details of all that. But I also gave some feedback to Mattson, which was also along the lines of like, here's some other things that we can improve. And Mattson was very reciprocal in this. Yes, that Goju, that's actually pretty sound. And so this is a really good point. I agree with this. And the part that I think Taylor was maybe the most impressed by is that in both of those situations, we were both giving each other feedback, which was not, I don't think, intended to be harsh, but it was direct. And Mattson and I have worked together for over a decade, and we have a very kind of transparent way of communicating. And he and I think, both follow the mindset of we want to grow. We want to be the best that we can be. And so we understand that this is where we're coming from. And I think both Mattson and I have very thick skin. A lot of this is from doing the PhD. But one of the things that I think allows us to take sort of this critical feedback and eliminate the noise, but still get the signal, is that we have learned, and I don't know, for Mattson, we'd have to ask him, but for me, a big thing of how I learned to be able to take this feedback in sort of a very straightforward way, even if the message is somewhat harsh, but it's valid, is things that I learned doing a PhD. And one of those is the ability to have emotional detachment from my work, which is really tricky, because one would imagine that people that are doing PhDs, or working at a startup or doing things that they really, really care about, having emotional detachment from that work where you're so passionate, you care so much, can be very hard, because you're arguably trying your best and giving it your all. I mean, like, I work 7 days a week, right? It's Sunday, Monday morning, 12:30. Well, I guess it's like still Sunday night. My bad. Sunday night. But who knows how long this podcast episode is going to be. And then I have to be up in the morning. But I do this because I deeply care. I really, really care. And hopefully all the folks that are watching this will get the sense that I'll make mistakes. I'll screw things up all the time. I won't use the right language. I'll mess all kinds of things up. I'll get my facts wrong. I'll sound like an idiot half the time, and just a bunch of other things. But hopefully no one will ever question whether or not I care, whether or not I truly care about machine programming and computer science and programming and systems and software engineering, because I do deeply care about these things. That's part of the reason why we're doing this channel, and part of the reason why I'm spending time discussing this is I think that in some sense I have I have a debt that I feel I need to pay forward, because I've been extremely lucky. I've been blessed with really amazing people, like all of these folks here, mentors that I've had throughout my life, people that have constantly gone out of their way to help me grow and point out the bazillion different mistakes I've made. And so I'm at this point to where I feel like, okay, I have to pay this forward and foster goodwill and hope that people will see it in the way of, like, I'm just trying to share the things that other people that are far smarter than me, far wiser than me, shared with me. And if you get something from this, that's great. And if you don't, then that's okay too. Totally fine. We're all traveling on like our own path in life. But this discussion with Taylor actually led to the point of, because it's something I've been working with Taylor on, is helping him think more like a PhD. And I've trained many PhD students and other folks. In fact, for my lab at Intel, most of the folks that joined were already had a PhD or postdoc, or some of them even early research scientists. And then I would try to give them guidance on like next steps for their career. So these were all very seasoned people. And what Taylor was pointing out is that he was really excited seeing how both Mattson and I didn't have an emotional attachment to the things that we were doing right or wrong. Instead, we were taking the feedback from this lens of listen to what is being said, understand if the feedback is valid or not valid, and if it is valid, follow through on it, fix it. And if it's invalid, try to explain why you think that's invalid, and have a very logical, not highly charged, not highly emotionally charged discussion about this. And I want to share that when I first started doing my PhD, I did not have this skill at all. This is the thing that I think I learned the most about doing a PhD. I think a lot of people have, or at least people that have spoken with me prior to doing a PhD, they often have these ideas that doing a PhD is somehow like you have to have 190 IQ, you have to be a child prodigy, and all of these things. I mean, like, I don't think I started the PhD program until I was like 30 or something. And I know other people that have started even later. I'm the furthest thing from a child prodigy. And so, and I don't have an IQ of 190 for sure. What I do have, though, is I just have a lot of grit. Is that I think this is where Linus Torvalds and I have similarities. Is he'll talk about how he's not a visionary. I think he is visionary, but he's very humble. I think he's actually very humble. When you work again at the world stage, and you're constantly being viewed from the spotlight of the world, it's really hard not to make a mistake. In fact, this is sort of what Mattson was pointing out, is I kind of made a mistake in the public spotlight. And again, he was absolutely right. It wasn't my intention to make this mistake, but I did. And he was gracious enough and kind enough to tell me, right? This goes back to this whole be kind, is not the kind of you are super polite and you're all puppy dogs and rainbows, but the kindness of like, I really care about you, and I think that you're making a mistake here, and so I want to share this with you so you can be better. And the truth is, if you think about it too from Mattson's perspective, this has got to be hard, because you have to say something that you may not want to tell someone, and they might not want to hear, right? Like, it actually, I think, takes a huge amount of strength and courage to deliver critical feedback to people that you have the intention of helping them, and it is substantiated. It isn't like you having an axe to grind. That certainly wasn't what Mattson was doing. He was really trying to help me grow. And I'm infinitely grateful for that. And likewise, I was sharing some things where I was also, we were just kind of going down a rabbit hole about a bunch of different things. So, circling back to the whole PhD process, the key thing that I think I learned more than anything else, I mean, okay, there were two major things, and it wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to have to learn all this technical stuff, and I was going to have to become like a walking encyclopedia and know everything. And sure, that was part of it. But that wasn't the real struggle for me. The real struggle for me, was I had to improve my communication skills. My spoken communication skills, I was speaking way too fast. And this is, I think, a common thing that I worked with many of my students on, and other people that are hyper-cerebral. They will often speak somewhat quickly because that's how fast their mind is moving. The problem with this, though, is oftentimes when you move this fast and you're speaking, you're likely confusing people. On top of that, they can get a message of like you trying to kind of con them, like you're the fast-talking sort of used car salesman, and that if you really believed in what you were saying, if you really were saying things of substance, you would be able to speak slowly. So every word mattered, and every word could be scrutinized. So this is one of the things that I had to learn about the communication. And believe me, I think they were absolutely right. I got away with giving a couple talks where I was super fast, but it's like night and day between those talks and some of the later talks I would give, like at my defense or conference talks where people told me that they thought I did, a reasonably good job, this kind of thing. So that was one piece. The other piece about communication, which was much, much harder, is I really needed to learn how to write. And I seriously neglected this for a very long time. And again, I thought I knew how to write, but the truth is, I didn't. And I look at this in hindsight now, and thankfully I had a bunch of mentors that were super patient and tried to explain this to me, and I was listening as best I could. At the time, I had a little bit of this resistance to the failure, because again, I was failing pretty catastrophically in all these different ways. So my papers were getting rejected. I didn't pass the PhD prelim exam the first time I took it. And then on top of that, my research advisors were telling me my communication skills needed like a lot of work. And so it was just like, felt like a comedy of errors. That there were just so many things I was doing wrong that like, can I not do anything right? And again, this is part of the challenge, I think, and the beauty of doing a PhD is it's the pressure of, can you rise to the occasion? Can you be in a situation where all around you are failures? All around you are critiques. You're being critiqued here and there and everywhere, and it feels like it's just coming from all sides. Can you still function? Can you still behave with class and not have like an outburst, not have an emotional breakdown? Be able to instead take this in stride. And the truth is, when I first started getting this feedback, I couldn't. I'm just being honest. It took me several iterations of rejected papers and feedback from my advisors on what I'm doing wrong before I really started to grok that there is a message here that I'm missing. And part of the reason why I'm struggling with these repetitively is I'm not actually listening. I'm too emotionally attached to this work because, again, I care. But my inability to separate the emotion from reason was seriously limiting my ability to grow. And so, as Taylor was pointing out, it's amazing how you and Mattson can navigate this space, and neither of you are like emotionally charged at all. You're having this very rational discussion about things that are pointing out these areas of growth, and neither party is like getting upset about it. They're actually just saying, yes, this is actually a valid point, and thank you for pointing this out, this kind of thing. It's like, wow, how does that happen? And I was saying to Taylor, I think that part of that is that Mattson and I, even though we're very passionate about our work, we have learned to take criticism on the things we do with an open heart and an open mind, and to completely have, we sort of disassociate with our work. We don't see our work or the things that we do as us. It's not us. It's something that we did. It's something we're accountable for, but it's not us. So when Mattson is pointing out that I made this mistake, he's pointing out that it's this action that I made that I should fix. But it doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It doesn't mean that I'm not enough. It's actually, in some ways, the opposite, is that Mattson has so much trust with me that he can give me this critical feedback and know that I'm going to take it in a very fair way. And likewise, I'm doing the same thing with Tim. And we are able to grow together. And a big part of it is this ability to hear what someone else is saying that's being critical of something you're doing, but then viewing it almost as if you're a third party. So one of the strategies that I teach for people that I'm mentoring on this is, if they are really struggling with it, and oftentimes people really struggle with this because there's this view of, I'm being attacked. And the truth is, I think that some people, maybe prior to doing a PhD or doing world-class research, they might be attacking you. I don't know, but I've definitely seen that, where people don't necessarily have good intentions. And so you kind of build up this defensive posture. But then you get to this new space where people really are trying to help you grow, and again, you're on the world stage, so people don't necessarily have the time to sugarcoat this or give you this whole preamble of like, well, I really like what you're doing here. This is super great, but I have an issue with this. And so paper rejected, right? And most of the time, it's more like, here are all the things that are wrong with the paper, rejected. And what is happening there in many of those cases is all the stuff that's not mentioned, those oftentimes are implicitly understood as, these are the things that you're getting right. But we don't have an infinite amount of time. And so instead, I'm just going to point out the things that you're doing wrong, because these are the things that you may not be aware of. So work on fixing these. Anything that I'm not mentioning is me basically saying, you're already doing those things right. And once you're able to sort of flip the story on this and invert it to like, oh, wow. So of all the things that I did, there's only these 3 things that I need improvement on. The other 107 things I'm doing right. This is awesome, right? And so that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that the feedback is not for you. The feedback is actually for someone else. And you are looking at that feedback, assessing, is this feedback logical? Is this substantiated? Should my friend that's getting this feedback take this seriously? And oftentimes I find when people that are too close to the work, they haven't really evolved yet to have this ability for emotional detachment. And again, evolved might sound a little bit pretentious. I don't mean it like this. I mean that it's sort of like your ability to control your emotions, I do think, is sort of this enlightened state. And the way to maybe think about this is, many of us have seen small children that throw sort of like these temper tantrums, right? And then we kind of don't blame the child, because we're like, well, they're just a child, they don't know that just their ice cream spilling over is not the end of the world. To them it is. And so they're crying and they're stamping their feet, or they're like pounding the ground or making a big deal, but it's because they haven't reached a level of emotional evolution. They haven't reached the state of emotional regulation yet, because their rational mind hasn't like fully formed at that point. A lot of times people argue that doesn't happen until maybe the age of 25. And so it's really common for young people to have sort of these emotional outbursts. And it can also be common for people that are not so young. But I think as you get older, you oftentimes have the ability to start to work on regulating these things. And I do think it's one of those things where it is like this enlightened state, very much like being a Stoic, is that we all can very easily devolve to the 7-year-old child in us that's throwing a temper tantrum and behaves really immaturely. It's very easy, I think, for us to do this. And I think if we're being intellectually honest, we can probably recall situations. Again, this requires a lot of emotional detachment. And so some people might be listening to this saying, I don't do that. I never do that. And I've, that time when I had an emotional outburst, it was fully justified. And it's like, well, was it though? What was actually gained from that? And I think it goes back to one of the videos we were watching about this idea of, why would I have this kind of reaction? What is gained by that? What am I feeling inside that's causing me to sort of lose the ability to articulate myself in a clear way and a logical way, rather than devolving to a, a reactive emotion. And oftentimes, I think it's because, well, I think there's many reasons, but one of them is the logical recourse would be to acknowledge that you made a mistake, that you did something wrong. But, and again, this goes back to this feedback thing, but rather than having the wisdom and the ability to regulate your emotions and think logically, people will often have a defensive posture. But because there's no sort of logical counter argument, people will bring in emotion. And emotion is not reason, right? And it's not to say that you having emotions is not without reason. Like, there probably is a number of steps that got you there. But what I mean is that you can share how you're feeling about something in a very rational way without sharing how you're feeling about something in a very emotional way. So, for example, I can tell you that maybe something that somebody said to me upset me. And I can say it like this. Or I can have an emotional outburst and start yelling and screaming at the top of my lungs about how angry I was. Both of those approaches could articulate the same idea, which is something upset me. But one of them is done in a way where an outside observer might think this person is totally unreasonable. I can't communicate with them because they are not hearing things in a rational way. Whereas the other is saying, no, I felt this, but I'm of a sound mind, and I can have sort of like a logical discourse about this on what led me to those emotions and how these things can be fixed. So this is my long-winded way of saying that I do think the ability to emotionally detach yourself from your work and listen to feedback without prejudice, with this open heart and mind, I do think that it's something that is an evolution, that it is a form of enlightenment. And a big reason for that is it requires training. It's something that we have to work toward. We have to sort of resist maybe the sort of reptile brain reaction of fight or flight, and instead calm ourselves and say, wait, I'm having an emotional reaction to this. I'm getting angry, or I'm getting scared, I'm fighting, or I'm fleeing. And is that really the right response here? Like, why can I not rationally think about this or discuss this? And once we can start to do this, and again, this is something that I think can take decades to master, then I think we can really start to, this is going to be a series too, this whole thinking like a PhD. This is not going to be a one-shot kind of thing. And by the way, I also think I'm going to not get this right. This is going to be Archimedean spiral stuff where we're going to iterate over and over and over again, trying to explain how this works, or how I kind of think this works. But this is one of the first pieces that I think we need to master. And the reason why I think this is one of the first pieces is this allows us to become introspective. This is this notion where we can now assess ourselves fairly and understand, what are we strong at? What are we weak at? When we're getting feedback, and this is something that we might have a defensive posture on, how can we take that feedback and hear it openly so we can grow and become better? And once you can start to do that, I think you can start to think like a PhD, because It allows you to keep your rational mind on at all times, even in moments where you have a belief or an intuition about something that you feel very convicted on. You have a strong conviction of this thing, but you might be wrong. And being able to hear that or think about that with a rational mind, I think, is one of the things that really separates people that I think have the ability to really kind of function at that PhD level and people that maybe not so much. And again, just to clarify, I'm not trying to say that all PhDs do this. I know there are many PhDs that, like, maybe they learned it. There's actually sort of an ongoing joke about how a PhD experience is really a humbling experience, is that almost anyone that goes through it, you get humbled in a major way. And then some people forget about that humbling experience and kind of return back to the less humble version. But some of us, I think, like Tim Matson, are able to keep that humility. And I think that that's amazing. And it's part of the reason why I love working with Dr. Matson, is he's, for someone that's as senior as he is, as accomplished as he is. I think he was mentioning he's written like 6 books and stuff, and helped co-create OpenMP and OpenCL and a bunch of other mind-boggling things. For having all those accomplishments, yet still being open to feedback from someone that's his junior by I don't even know how many years, I think that's a spectacular person. That's somebody that I think, at least for me, I will want to work with and be around for potentially an infinite amount of time. Because if he can do that, then I can likely learn how to do that from him. So with that said, I think we're going to call it a night. I didn't really get into many of the things. Actually, this is left over from last time, so we can get rid of this. But this part is... Okay, let's just quickly go through some of these. So we discussed this, thinking like a PhD, and this is the team, at least some of the core team. And just very quickly, Urs is co-founder, our chief engineer, chief architect, probably one of the most amazing engineers I've ever worked with in my life, and I've worked with some amazing engineers. This guy's legendary status. That's me. Then we have Paul. Paul's my one of maybe 7 siblings that I have. He's my older brother. I have a few different older sister, half-sister, stepsister. But of all my siblings, Paul's the one that I think I trust his logical mind and his ability to execute. I mean, this guy gets stuff done. It's really incredible. Oh, and by the way, this is like the Burley background. I have this too, just so you know. It just... Oh, it's on the other screen. Okay. It's the multi-monitor thing. But, yeah. Then we have Lee Boyd. He's one of our also superhero engineers, and like Paul, Lee gets stuff done. It's incredible that we have sort of thrown Lee to the wolves with just an incredible amount of code, and sort of no matter what the problem is, Lee can come in and knock it out and work on this, even in the stuff that he maybe doesn't totally love, which is some of the really advanced C++ code that Urs has written, which... Yeah, it's surprising to me that people don't just love C++. I'm still very confused about this. I mean, like, I kind of am, and I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not joking. Anyway, that's another topic we can deal with later. But Lee's basically one of our head programmers for Merly. And then we have Dr. Matson, who I've worked with for over a decade, and he's our chief evangelist. And also he's working with us on architectural things moving forward. But in addition to helping us refine the story and understand the space that we're working with, Merle, Matson is the first and the only Merlian fellow, technical fellow, which is basically the top rung of technical positions in almost all companies. So, and with the number of powerhouses that we have at Merle, the fact that we only have one Merlian fellow, and it's this guy, I think that's, yeah, he's in a very special class of n=1 type of thing. Then we have Ashish, who we hired just maybe 6 months ago, and Ashish is our new, I think he just got promoted and he's a program director. He's working on things related to the product, but he's also starting to get involved in other things with the company, like external interactions that we have with different development teams, working with customers, a bunch of other things, which is great. And then last we have Taylor, who I think many of us know and love, and he was involved in some of the early Goju Tech Talk episodes, and he'll be back at least once in a while, but he's been super busy working on driving a whole bunch of the engineering, also working with customers. And so Taylor is my chief of staff, but he's also the head of product engineering. And so he wears many hats. He is driving a lot of the organization for the engineering. He's driving a lot of the organization for the product. He is working directly with customers, also assisting me with various VC things. I mean, Taylor is sort of like a mini me in some sense, except he's probably better at most of the things that I do, which is part of the reason why I constantly delegate so many things to Taylor, because he's just knocking it out of the park constantly. So that's a quick overview of some of the folks that are on this. Again, this isn't the whole team, but these are some of the people that I rely on quite a bit. And I think it was Ashish's idea to take this photo. And so after we took it, I was like, oh yeah, I got their permission, by the way, to show this. So they all know, and we're, I think, pretty excited that I'd be sharing this. The next thing I want to share, and maybe this is the last thing, is because we're doing this company highlight, I wanted to very quickly give a nod to giveeasy.co. And this is it this one? Yeah. This is one of my former students' company. So this is a startup that I think they just got, I believe they just received some incubation funding, investment from a pretty good firm. And so we can see from their write-up here, they're committed to building a more connected, generous world. We believe that philanthropy is more than just a donation of money or time. It's about sharing stories that inspire others to give. That is why we have built the only social platform dedicated to showcasing, facilitating, and amplifying the world's stories behind giving. And I think that's awesome. And I do have to say, of the students that I've worked with, and several of my former students are co-founders or founders of various companies. My student Isaac is, I think, one of the most outstanding. After working with him, it became very obvious that he's also a one-off. And so this is Isaac here. I don't know these other two gentlemen, but I suspect that they're probably outstanding as well if Isaac is working with them. And so we have a little bit more of their background here. Yeah, Isaac was, I think he also got into the university on like a tennis scholarship. I think he's like a really good tennis player. I know nothing about tennis, like less than nothing. So I think Isaac was explaining it to me at some point, and it's just, but really outstanding guy. And here's some more information about his other two co-founders, I think. So I wanted to take a moment and highlight this. I think I wrote them a letter of recommendation for their funding, and I'm big into kind of, like we were talking about, this whole paying it forward. And I really hope that these guys end up having wild success, and I'm definitely kind of like in their corner trying to help them. So with that, I think that we'll adjourn for today, and maybe next time we'll get into a little bit of the rational thought and start to do more on this thinking like the PhD. Again, I want to close. I know that I've said this multiple times, so I want to say it one more time, is this in no way is trying to present this argument of somehow that I know better, or if you don't have a PhD, you don't know how to think. I think that's not the message here at all. Instead, it's more that when you dedicate your life to really leaning into your failures, the things that you have not been successful in doing, and you really scrutinize those, and you do this in a very fair way, I think that there's certain things that happen with the way you think. And again, this, my graduate experience was over the course of like 7 years or something. And so I got like ample experience with this whole rejection thing. I think I got like 10 paper rejections before my first tier 1 conference paper was accepted. And, admittedly, it has gotten significantly easier since those days to break into tier 1 papers. But not only do I think that's a byproduct of knowing more, sure, I know significantly more 15 years in the future than I did, or 20 years in the future than when I was first doing grad school. But I think a bigger part is the emotional maturity, is having that sense of detachment, which again can be really hard for people that deeply care, because it kind of goes against your nature. Is the reason why you're doing really profound, impactful things is because you do care. And what's tricky about this is, in some ways, I'm not saying, or what I'm trying to say is, I'm not trying to say don't care. I think you really should care. And I think that's one of the things I look for in people that I want to work with, is I love when people deeply care. Like Mattson deeply cares about things, and so does Urs, and just basically all the Merlians. Taylor Dozel deeply cares about all these things. I think is why he and I are some of the best conversations we have start at like 1 a.m. But when you're getting feedback, when you are asked to critically assess your own work or listen to critical feedback on your work, this is where having this emotional detachment, having the ability to deeply care, but be so kind of enlightened in how you care that you are able to suspend your passion for a moment, knowing that doing so will likely make you even better. Yeah. Okay.